Hello, Trevor.
Hey, how's it going, Mr. Jake?
It's going well. We're starting a new thing today, and we'll see how it goes. I have cheekily titled this Caution, Men at Work, because it is a conversation about Next Gen Men's Equity Leaders arm. And for anyone who doesn't know, Next Gen Men is a nonprofit working towards a future where boys and men feel less pain and cause less harm. And the way we do that is by changing the way we see, act, and think about masculinity among youth in community and at workplaces. And Trevor here, my colleague and co-host today, leads our workplace arm, which we call Equity Leaders, which works in male-dominant industries like oil and gas, construction, finance, tech, you name it. If there's somewhere north of 60% male representation, that's a place we thrive in for work. And one of the reasons why we wanted to start this new thing is we find ourselves having some of the same conversations over and over, and we do those conversations one to one, and we thought we would do them one to many. How does that sound, Trevor?
I mean, it's great because I love ranting and getting hot and bothered by a lot of these topics. So it's great to actually have a conversation with the broader audience than just you and I sort of calling each other on the phone after working through a client challenge and talking about things that could be done. So this is great to actually talk to a bit of a broader network.
Awesome. And as we know, I'm a big basketball fan, so I think through these conversations, we'll be practicing the art of the alley-oop often. So I'll be throwing lobs and you'll be dunking them down. So one of the first things that we wanted to chat about today was this dressing up that we do. And we have a lot of clients in Calgary. They just wrapped up 10 days of the Calgary Stampede. They all dressed up like cowboys and cowgirls and, farm folk. But recently before that, you're based in Toronto, where we also do a lot of our work, and June is the big month of Toronto Pride. What's coming up for you when I talk about corporations dressing up?
Pride's always really exciting. Pride's always really interesting because and particularly this year, because it's been a bit more of a hot button issue for a lot of people, particularly around trans issues. But it's really exciting to see banks, consulting companies, your local grocery store, everyone put the pride flag out and lean into inclusivity and equity and what that means, and celebrating all diverse forms and great, awesome, love it. But really what it also brings up for me is a bit of anger and frustration in that space. And it's not because I necessarily want more from them. I'm just sort of tired of a lot of these organizations thinking that they can cut a check or toss out a rainbow flag from their office window and say, we've done it, we did it, and pat themselves on the back. We've talked with financial organizations a lot that are the co-sponsor of the Pride Parade, or they put pride flags outside of their branches and talk about inclusivity. Now, but on the flip side, you say, okay, in September, what are you doing for allowing trans individuals to access business loans? What are you doing to allow different individuals of different identities to use credit card products under their chosen name and identity? What are you doing to battle some of the unconscious biases when someone in a rural outlet enters into your bank and tries to access services and may encounter unconscious prejudice and bias by your staff on the front lines? And so there seems to be a bit of a disconnect. And so that's one of the things that really frustrates me. And we hear so much about pink washing. But really what that means is what actually comes on July 1st. Pride ends, Pride Month ends, July 1st, we move on. There's all these memes and jokes about how on July 1st, everyone packs away their Pride gear and their rainbow flags and waits for next year for it to come out, just like your Christmas decorations, your Halloween decorations. But really what's being, I think the call in right now is saying, corporations, what the hell are you doing every other day of the year? It's really, really great that you had a cocktail reception. It's really, really great that you had a charity come in and talk about what you're doing. It's really, really great that you raised a certain amount of money for some initiative during June. But what are you doing for your career individuals in January? What are you doing for your career individuals all year long? And I think that's the call out for a lot of these organizations. That's not just about cutting a check. it's not just about greenlighting an event. It's saying, how are you actually engaging different populations and groups throughout the year? And I think the call to action is on that. It's not just saying, what are you doing? It's saying, are you ready to have that conversation? How are you actually opening yourself up to have that conversation? Who are you tapping into to say, like, what is needed outside of June? What is needed in September? What is needed in October? What do we need to be doing to changing our own policies? What do we need to be doing to having this conversation? And I think what rubs me when we talk about dressing up on this is a lot of organizations are really, really fired up about the partnership with Pride in June, but aren't following up with the actual work come July, August, September, October, and on. They're not necessarily continuing their funding or support of their employee resource groups. Their senior leaderships and CEO are not actually showing up and actually saying that this is still a genuine priority for the business. This is not a side issue. This is not a marketing spend, but this is something that's fully integrated into their business ideology and methodology. And so my call to task is, yeah, I'm pissed, to be perfectly honest, because I love the celebration in June, but it's not followed up with real action and real commitment for the rest of the year. And we see that when we work with different clients. We see that when we hear from different employees and different businesses in different areas of the country in terms of saying that they feel alienated, that the language that there's used against them, there's a policy at the head office, but that culture is not being really felt on the front lines within their organization year round. And so transfer that's Toronto, transfer to other jurisdictions throughout your year. You mean you have a Pride celebration, people really fired up. Is it actually safe for people to be queer and to live their true identity and find psychological safety in the workplace every single day in every facet and every location of your business, inside and out? So for me, that rubs me a little bit right now. I'm really excited about Pride, but then I'm also frustrated about the fact that it excuses a lot of organizations from doing the work that's really, really required to make their organization safer, more inclusive, more successful, and more diverse.
Yeah, and like, what a missed opportunity as well too. I mean, even as we think about, some of these national partners that we're talking about, there's a funny Canadianism in this as well too, where we say that, Toronto's not the center of the Canadian universe. There's not just Toronto Pride in June, it's in July in Vancouver, it's in September in Calgary. So if you're going to commit to Pride and to being a queer friendly workplace year round, you do need to, time zone shift, geography shift, those types of things. But beneath that, obviously, is what you're scratching at, is that performative nature. And I think you said, hey, we're not asking for more. And I think that's the tough part, is we're not saying you need to sponsor a Pride float 12 months of the year, Christmas float be damned. We're saying, are you, like you said, making your true policies around, let's say, parental leave benefits for same-sex parents, or the ability to, have conversations when you go to the bank and seek services, where it's not just husband and wife in heteronormative relationships. We start adopting language like partner or spouse, or those types of things that are just more inclusive for everyone. So it's not, hey, you cut this large check 1 month of the year and we want you to do that year round. I'm pretty sure that the vast majority of people would actually say, we'd rather you take that investment and put it in the things that actually matter versus, the celebration. Because what are we celebrating? We don't yet have a society and culture free of trans and homophobia. So do that work.
Well, we had a client that we chatted to, and they were talking about, how are we going to organize Pride? What does Pride look like? And the conversation would be like, can you call it Pride? You do not have a single person in this organization who has self-identified as queer who is coming forward to participate in the organizing of this initiative. Can you call it Pride? And what that signals to me is saying that there's allies around who want to signal that they're allies, that they want to do the work, that they want to find community and bring things forward. But the culture is not safe enough for people to actually be who they are, live their authentic selves, and bring their authentic self to work. And so there's a big gap there. We had another organization who was a very, very big partner in Pride. It prides itself on being an incredibly inclusive and diverse and equitable workplace. And then you have comments on the front lines, so really strong policies, really strong public support for this issue. And then you have employees on the front lines talking about, I don't mind you, but why do they have to be so loud about it? Like, I don't mind you. You seem cool, Ken. But all those other gay people out there at the parade, they're just too much for me. And so for me, I'd rather, instead of a budget of X amount on rainbow flags, is, can you actually build a culture where you can actually have meaningful conversations to help educate and create a culture where people understand a little bit more about other individuals, are more empathetic. It is a more inclusive, it is a more psychologically safe environment for people to live their true identities without having to deal with microaggressive behaviors or even more problematic and violent behaviors. That's where we're missing. So we really get the celebration part. We get the high visibility in the marketing part because businesses recognize that it's something that they really need to lean into. But where businesses have really, and leaders have found a very big gap is the performance that they need to do for employees and external partners, and the work that actually is required to make it safe and successful for every single person within all communities of their organization.
Yeah. And this kind of brings me to the next thing that I wanted to chat with you about is the idea that, you know, allyship isn't meant to be easy. It's hard. It costs you something, time, social capital, emotion, energy, you know, whatever. There has to be some sort of investment. So, you know, showing up on the day and waving a rainbow colored flag, like that's really easy. Like, and don't get me wrong. Like if we look at places like professional hockey and those types of things, they can't even freaking fly the flag. So like that low hanging bar, they can't even do. But when there's that kind of that next level, that next step of need for allyship, you know, I think about myself, for example. I grew up in a generation where anything that was kind of different, wrong, or off-putting was, that's so gay, right? And so, like, in my own programming, in my brain, I had turned the word gay into a pejorative. And early on in the days of Next Gen Med, we actually had a gay man on our board. And I had to confront the fact that I had to unlearn that gay is not a pejorative, it is an identity, because I had a hard time saying that he was gay, because in my mind, that equaled bad or negative, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we're talking about allyship, we're talking about that work and that effort to recognize where you are on your journey, where the origins of those problems come from, and do the work to, you know, learn and unlearn that stuff. So, you know, why are we stuck in this conversation about the easy allyship, and we're missing that conversation about what the actual difficult work is to do?
I think a lot of people, if you sat down and talked to most people and said, like, do you consider yourself an ally for whatever marginalized group that you may want to refer to, I think most people would say, like, yeah, like they think of themselves as not racist, not homophobic, not transphobic, like in a lot of different ways, not misogynist. And then the challenge is when the moment's upon them, when they're needed to step forward and either advocate or challenge or really lean into that active allyship role, they often fall down or they're MIA. And I don't think it's because they actively are like, I'm not interested in doing this. I think there's two problems with it. One is we over subscribe what we think we're doing in our mind. We think we're doing a lot more than we actually are. And I think one of the reasons that we're able to sort of find ourselves in that groove is because we're centering that around our own lived experience. And I think that's problematic because, like, me as a cis white individual, if I'm talking about what I'm going to be doing for trans issues or issues around race, you mean if I'm centering it in my existence as a white man, that is always going to create barriers and blind items on what I can and can't witness and understand and see that other people experience. And so my allyship will only go so far. And so I think that is one of the roadblocks that we exist. But I think the other one, and this is the one that I think is more crucial for people to understand. Yep, go ahead. I
just want to interrupt and add something. I recently wrote an article, The Trouble with Male Allies, and I was citing some statistics here. And I just wanted to share the statistics to highlight what you're talking about. This comes from, I believe, some Catalyst work. We can follow up on the source of it, but it's called the Allyship Gap, Diverging Opinions. And this is specifically about male allies, and this can exist within, you know, pride allies or allies for racial justice, those types of things as well too. But there was a question posed: men are doing everything they can to advance gender equality in the workplace. 77% of men said they agreed. Only 41% of women agreed that men are. That's, you know, a 36% delta. The next question: men at my work would be good listeners to a woman reaching out about an experience of workplace harassment. 89% of men said they would be. Only 58% of women agreed. So, like you said, we are definitely over ascribing our ability or how we show up or how we're perceived as allies when really the group that we're trying to ally with does not see us as safe or supportive.
So when I went into college and university campuses, and I would talk about sexual violence with students and student leaders, and we would chat about this, and you would talk to like all these young men, and you talk about sexual assault, you talk about sexual violence and things like that, and every single one's like, man, if I saw it, I would step in, I would do this, I would do that, blah blah blah, and then you're like, cool, but what about the different forms of sexual assault? It's not just like a Brock Turner type situation. What about something subtle that's happening at a party or what have you? Like, doesn't matter. I would step in and all that. And then you actually see real circumstances where someone on their dorm room floor was sexually assaulted by someone else, or someone was accused on their dorm room floor. And then it's instant, the contextualizing. Well, is that what actually, or is this, or like, oh, you know what I mean? But to think about that, and we start to contextualize it around our world. And so it's really easy for people to say, hey, I'm going to be an ally. I'm going to be an ally. You can count on me. I'm going to step up. I'm going to do that. But then when it starts to creep into our own world, we start to fall down on every aspect of that. And it doesn't mean that we have to flip the table at every single instance around us. We need to recognize the roadblocks that are in our own way. And a lot of that are our own unconscious biases, it's our own contextualization, and it's our lack of ability to decenter these circumstances and things away from ourselves. And the challenge that we have there is not just acknowledging it, it's practicing it. And if we're not providing ourselves the opportunity to practice that, if we're not calling on each other to practice that more, then we can't get there. And I think that's the difficult thing. We talk so much about allyship at work. We go in and talk with clients all the time, and everyone's like, yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And we do surveys at the end of these like really in-depth conversations. Like, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. And then the moment they hear a male, as in your example, a male leader hears from a female peer about what they actually required allyship, and the guy's like, is that really needed though? And you're like, well, yes, that's what's being asked. It's not that based and centered on you. And so I think in this specific piece where allyship practicing it becomes really, really hard is, one, we upfront say that we're ready to spend the cost, whether it be time, social capital, energy, whatever it is. And then when the bill comes, we start to be like, we split this bill. Like, oh, like, you mean, gotta talk to me, can I get a discount? Like, we're not ready to actually make the spend in real life. And so we need to have an honest conversation about what you're willing to do, what we're willing to do. And then we also need to have an honest conversation about how we practice it. You're not going to flip a switch and be perfect. You're not going to flip a switch and be Captain Ally. We need to actually be practicing having these conversations. When we bring it back to the source question at the very, very beginning, is about like, why does allyship seems so easy, but it's actually really hard, is the fact that I think truly when it all boils down to, we all have a really hard time being called in. We have a hard time being called out or called in. I view myself as an ally. And if someone says, Trevor, what you're doing is not enough, or Trevor, what you're doing is harmful, or Trevor, like, you may think you're on this, but it's still problematic, or I need you to do more. It's hard to hear that, because you think you're doing this, you think you're doing that, you're giving so much of energy, and you're still hearing that it's not what's required, or it's not enough, or what I imagine is right is actually wrong. That's crappy to hear. That's tough to process. And so as leaders, we need to be better positioned to practice getting that feedback, not taking it personally, and recognizing, okay, how do I readjust and recalibrate? Who do I need to hear from more to make myself more inclusive and a better leader? And if we're not practicing that, how do we hear? How do we internalize that? How do we practice that empathy? You're never going to be an effective ally, because then all you're going to be doing is an ally in name only. It's something that you're going to write on your LinkedIn, walk away from, but you're not actually going to be doing anything. So we need to start practicing more, and corporations and leaders need to start creating that space where we can more effectively call each other in, not just teach someone how to say it, but teach leaders actually how to receive it and hear it as well.
Well, I also think about like our book club that we lead, right? Like, I often, joke, but I'm pretty serious. I say it's a dojo for aspiring inclusive leaders, because it's a space where we're unpacking the author's story from their perspective as an underrepresented or marginalized group. And it's challenging us in ways that, we don't often experience. But the great part of that is it's challenging us before we have to experience it in the workplace, right? So, the example around allyship, around let's say sexual harassment or something like that. We're reading a book and it's like, wow, like she was really like sexually assaulted like that. That's like so problematic and hurtful and blah, blah, blah. Like we feel those feelings in advance of potentially having to like experience that in the workplace and show up for someone who needs us in that moment. It's all well and fine to, you know, make these stories and talk about how we're going to be heroes and those types of things. I think especially as men, like we're socialized as, you know, these shining knights, and you know, we grow up watching superheroes and those types of things. We want to be that in that moment, but you know, like the real work happens in the gym, in the dojo, in our friend groups. We need to be emotionally fit and inclusively fit to show up in that moment when necessary.
Well, and that's where it happens, right? Like you and I can go and give a speech or workshop, or another leader can do that, or someone can like tune into a TED talk. Cool. You'll learn something, maybe you'll expand your perspective. But really where that attitudinal behavioral shift happens is on the peer-to-peer level. And in the workplace, we can have these conversations. Cool. But is it also going to be the same thing if, to your point, at the gym, you're out for drinks with buddies, you're hanging out with other dads or parents or what have you, and you make a joke and people can sort of like push back and like say like that's weird. Like, have you thought about this? Have you thought about impacts? Like that's where it happens. We had a client, an organization was chatting about it not that long ago, and they were saying like, I don't get this pronoun thing. I don't get the pronouns in my email. I don't understand it. Not going to do it. And it's because the workplace had come to them and said like, hey, you need to put your pronouns in your thing. This is the edict. This is the new format. Everyone put it in. And this person's like, that's stupid. And they were quite obtuse about it. And what it came down to was the question being like, why do we need to do it? And the conversation were forever other buddies in the room being like, oh, hey man, like here's who it matters for. This is why representation matters. This is who is looking at that. It's not just about if there's a trans person here. It's also about if Jim is dealing with his family and there's someone in there who's questioning their gender, and it's representation that matters for that. And at the end of that conversation, the person who walked in being like, this is BS. I'm not putting my being like, okay, it makes sense to me. I'm going to do it. And that wasn't because we came in and said, hey, you need to do this because this is what's healthy. This is what's safe in the organization. It's because his buddies and his peers were like, think about it this way. Like, have you thought about it this way? It's not a big thing for you. Enter a few like letters after your name, but it has a big impact. So that is a perfect example of what you're saying. Like it happens at the gym. It happens socially. It's not going to necessarily happen in these workplace meetings, but we need to be more readily available to hear the feedback from other people, because sometimes it can be awkward. But the feedback's for good. I get it all the time. Like I'm in sessions and I'll say a word and it's so coded into our vernacular and I didn't realize it. And someone will like put up their hand and be like, hey, Trevor, I don't know if you realized what you just said, but X, Y, Z. Like, oh my God, I didn't know that. Like, I didn't know that was the source of what that word was and its impact on communities. And so my reaction, and this is taking work, is not to like flip a table and being like, you're being too sensitive. Like, I didn't mean it like that. You should take it this way. My reaction is being like, wow, thank you for telling me. That was not my intent. I recognize it. You may have felt that way to other people. And then the call to action for me is saying, okay, are there other words that I can use that are more aligned with the intent that I want to bring to that statement and that sentence? And that's the work. So the call-in isn't about being like, I'm a bad person because that word slipped into my presentation. It's more about being like, oh my gosh, thank you for telling me. It was tough to hear because it derailed my presentation and it was an awkward interaction. But from that, I was like, being like, great, it's maybe better. And great, now my presentation, my words, and not just in the workshop, but other conversations is more meaning reflects my values. So it's not a bad thing, but it can be an awkward thing. We just need to practice it more.
Yeah. And inclusive leadership is not a destination. It's a journey, right? It's something that we're just constantly left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot, because, and that doesn't preclude, you or I who do it professionally, like you said, right? Like, for example, like one thing I'm really working on right now is rather than saying that's crazy, I try to say that's wild. Right. Mm-hmm. Because, mental health is in the spotlight. I've struggled with mental health myself, but, those are subtle things that we can do to make the world more inclusive and safer for other people psychologically. But another thread that I really wanted to pick up on for you as well too, there is giving the space to unpack why pronouns are happening, right? Like, it's not just like a decision that happens, you get an email about it, do it, or you're out of compliance, or those types of things. We've seen this in a lot of workplaces. Like, we have an entire equity focused leadership program, and the whole basis of that program is acknowledging that workplaces are not great at building capacity in their leaders, right? So we've seen this. There's the whole freaking Peter principle, where you're promoted to the highest level of your incompetence. But the example of that is, you're a tremendous individual contributor, let's say a coder, and it's like, we want you to do that, but now we want you to lead a team. You doing individual coding work and then you managing a team are two totally different skill sets, and your company is not investing in you to give you that management experience. There's some people who thrive in that, there's others who really don't. But that exact same thing happens around inclusive leadership. The landscape has shifted. We know that diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, whatever frameworks we want to use, are really valuable in the modern workplace. Emotional intelligence in a world of artificial intelligence is going to be key in all this. What are companies doing to build that capacity, and what are they doing, especially with individuals who may not be experiencing those things, right? Like, someone may push back on me on this, and that's okay, but I think it's a privilege in this instance to live the experience of someone on the margins, because that's your experience all day, every day. That's the expertise, the lived expertise that you bring to the workplace. Whereas me, tall, straight, cisgender, white, male, like, I don't have that lived experience. I don't think about that all day. So I need some extra work, some extra help, so that I can meaningfully show up. How do we navigate that in that workplace, building up that capacity with the people who look like me, who may need that extra help?
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not super fired up to quote Donald Rumsfeld, but like, you don't know what you don't know, right? And it's outside your purview, and so you may think you can empathize, you can understand as much, but you don't know what you don't know. And it is a privilege to not have to experience some of those things. You could be the most progressive person in the entire world and understand and all that, but if you just don't have to experience it. One of the ones that we talk about a lot in this space is like, when we ask women about, like, what did you do not to be sexually assaulted today? And we'll ask guys first, what did you do? And I mean, there's some jokes and things like that, but there's no really substantive thing that most men around the room have thought about. And when you ask women in the workplace or social settings or whatever, and it's about like, like where they went for a run that morning, that was like a populated area, where when they walked to transit, they walked on a certain side of the street, they stood at a certain part of the platform, that was this and all that. They may have called their mom on the way to class. Like, it's just a massive list all day long of conscious decisions about their safety, and preventative and proactive measures on their safety. And so when you talk to men, and men start to think about that, being like, oh my gosh, like, I don't have to consciously, maybe sometimes I'm walking at night and I see a shady person, I'm like, I'm going to walk on the other side of the street, but it's not a daily thing, and that is a privilege. And so it's important for us, I think, in the quest, we don't know what we don't know. I can't fault someone who's never experienced that and has never been exposed to that, to not understanding that. But I can fault someone for not trying to understand it, for not opening themselves up, for not recognizing that there are experiences other than their own, that they can expand their perspective, and that they can understand a little bit more about people. And this goes back to the earlier concept about, we need to take a hot moment. Everything's not all about you. And hit timeout, pause that inner dialogue that's telling us, hey, like, what about this? What about that? Blah, 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 blah. And just live in the moment, hearing other people's experiences. We have a hard time with this. You go to a scary movie, and like, every single time, this is one of the reasons I can't watch suspension movies, because it drives me bonkers. And you watch a movie, and like, it's the biggest joke, right? You're watching Scream, and the person runs up the stairs instead of out the front door. And you're like, why didn't you do that? Or like, they don't stab the person an extra time, like the bad guy at the end. Like, you have 2 bullets left, shoot them, make sure they're dead so they don't come back and kill you again. Obviously, the bad guy always comes back because they never finish them off. So like, it's always these things. And so, but it's the same thing. We contextualize it. If I did it, this is what I would have done. Instead, park it. Live in the other person's experience for a moment. Understand, you will never understand every input, but understand just about like what some of those impacts were, what their pathway was. If we embark on a quest to try to understand as many different perspectives as possible, that's where we start to open it up, and you start to see things in different avenues, in different spaces where you can start to go and explore more. The algorithm of our life, if you will, is going to keep us close to people who look and sound like us. and the same pathways. It's the same thing if you go on TikTok, right? It's going to push the same things that it thinks you're interested in based off of what you've already scrolled. So if you think about it in your workplace, you're only going to hit the people who work in your vertical, who work in your floor, who work in that type of space. So it's important on all of us to break that algorithm, just like TikTok. Start exploring a few new hashtags. Go and explore and try to find a different person that will infiltrate your For You page and start to throw off that algorithm. So in real life, it's the same way. You can't just sit around a lunchroom table and say like, hey, Todd, hey, Sarah, hey, like Marge, tell me, you know those stories. That's the same thing. You need to start inviting new people into the room. You need to start going to different spaces. Maybe it's about going to an employee resource group and saying, hey, how can I help? Like, tell me what's happening with your experiences. It's not about tapping someone on the shoulder. This is what it's not about, like a marginalized individual in the workplace, and be like, hey, so like tell me what's up. Like, it's not about burdening people with the work, but it's recognizing that you need to go out and learn more. And that's not about like a nice to have. That's not like something that's just being like, wouldn't that be great if you do? I think this is when we go through, and like LinkedIn did their survey about what the most important soft skills were in terms of contributing to leadership and coming forward. Deloitte, KPMG, they've all done similar research in terms of what's important for leaders in the next economy. And a big part of that is that EQ. And a big part of that is being able to understand other people, their challenges, their motivations, their values, that soft side. And so if we're not investing time in understanding more about their values, their experience, their perspective, their challenges, their story, their pathway, then you are, as a leader, intentionally building roadblocks for yourself. And I think that's probably one of the biggest motivations. If you're not just doing it for the human side, about trying to make the workplace safer and more inclusive for other people, it is going to fail you if you are not doing this as a leader. You are going to be putting up impediments to your own growth, your own success, your own financial success, your own career success, whatever, if you are not heavily leaning into the emotional intelligence and understanding different unique pathways and experiences.
Yeah, and I mean, just to put that in a learner's journey, right? And to maybe take it away from Donald Rumsfeld, all right, there's unconscious incompetence, right? It's like, I don't know any better, therefore I can't do any better. Then there's conscious incompetence, and it's like, I know better, right? Like, so maybe someone who's aware of pride, but they don't know how to do any better, right? And then there's conscious competence, and it's like, I know better and I'm doing better, I'm taking the actions, I'm doing the work, those types of things. And then it becomes unconscious competence, because at the end of the journey, it just becomes embodied. And if someone says to you, well, why are you such a good inclusive leader? You're just like, I don't know, this is how I lead, this is how I show up. And the reality of why we say it's a journey and never a destination, those 4 stages, like, if you really wanted to do it, you would have to do it around disability. You would have to do it about racial justice. You'd have to do it about gender equality. You'd have to do it about, all these types of things. So inevitably, you can't do all those things everywhere all at once. So you're going to be at different points of the journey in all those different types of things. And that's why you need to be comfortable being called in and those types of things. So I think for our first session of Caution at Work, Caution Men at Work, we're 2 men, we're here, we're working on these things, we're helping other people work on these things. That was really great. We covered a lot of ground. I counted how many times you said flip the table, only 2 this time. So we'll see if we can get to 3 next time. But that was a great chat, Trevor. I'm looking forward to our next one.
Cheers.
Ciao.